If Penn State was going to go outside of the box and get anybody for this offensive coordinator spot, they got the right guy.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And that is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State Nittany Lions, including offensive coordinator hires. Check out FanDuel.com, the official sports book of Locked On, the official sports book that is now making your free bets come true. All you got to do is bet $5 on any money line bet, and if it wins, you get $150 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Well, Andy Kotelnicki is the next Penn State offensive coordinator here. We're talking all things from why this move happened, how it happened, why it makes a lot of sense, and how's the offense going to look? What's the staff going to look like? Right? Why did this move happen? What are the concerns? Any concerns here? And then we're also bringing on Derek Johnson, the host of Locked On Jayhawks, to talk about this as well. First things first, help out the channel. If you're not an everydayer already, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. This is the instant reaction to the show, or to the hiring on this show of Andy Kotelnicki to Penn State. And this was the right hire. This was, and it's a good one because of all the success that he has had wherever he's been, whether it's Wisconsin Whitewater, whether it's Buffalo, Kansas, and he is somebody that, like Brennan Marion, when we talked about Coach Brennan Marion, who's now the offensive coordinator of UNLV, at least at this moment, right? We don't know what kind of moves he's going to make. But we talked about innovation. We talked about creativity, and that's something that is associated with Andy Kotelnicki here. And the numbers show it wherever he's been, succeeding at every step along the way. But he's a young, up-and-coming offensive guru, someone that runs is not boxed in to an offensive system, because everybody's concern was going to be, well, how does Drew Aller fit into the offense? Are they going to get a pro style coordinator? Are they going to embrace Bo Pribula, maybe go back to a Joe Moorhead? And from my point of view, it did make sense to go get Joe Moorhead and bring him back to Penn State. But who knows what Joe Moorhead said? The conversation's not about what should have been, what could have been with Joe Moorhead, right? It is about what Andy Kotelnicki brings, since he has been hired by Penn State, or is set to be hired, as Bruce Feldman of The Athletic reports this. Andy Kotelnicki, from his background, Wisconsin Whitewater, was the offensive coordinator of back-to-back national champions at the Division II level in 2013 and 2014. He has followed Lance Leipold wherever he has gone since, for the better part of the past decade here. At Buffalo, two-time MAC conference runner-up, and Buffalo wasn't all that competitive. Then Leipold and Kotelnicki showed up between 2015 and 2020, and those teams were much better, much competitive, much more competitive. They went from 2-10 and progressively built up, right? They went from 2-10 to 6-6 to contending to winning the MAC East Division, not winning the MAC conference title, but still that progress that they were able to reignite a program from the ground up. And then Kansas was abysmal. Kansas had everybody thought that they were cursed because Les Miles went in there, couldn't win. And then Lance Leipold and his staff, including Andy Kotelnicki, show up, and the offense becomes one of the powerhouse offenses in the Big 12, one of the more respected ones in all of the country. So that is what Penn State is getting, somebody who is innovative, someone who understands what it takes to be successful. I think it's key that people need to be in situations where they are winners, where they have success, because then they know what the standard was. Okay, that's great that you have an awesome offense, but is your program doing all that great? Is your program doing well? He's won championships. He's rebuilt programs, part of rebuilds from the ground up, and he's won it every step of the way so far. And this is the natural next spot to move from the Big 12 to the Big 10. At Kansas was 8-4 this past season in 2023. Kansas averaging over 35 points per game and 438 yards per game in 2022, and 33 points per game this season, and 434 yards per game. What I really like about Kotelnicki is the kind of play caller that he is. Exceptional play caller, because you have to get creative in what he's building. So not only is he creative with his offensive system, he gets creative with the offenses in the middle of the game, and that was something that it seemed like Mike Yurcich was lacking. Okay, Kotelnicki, this is what Kansas spectators, Kansas, and we're going to get the Kansas expert analysis at the end of the show to talk about and get that true full perspective. But Kotelnicki was really good at calling games when they were behind in a deficit. Kotelnicki didn't shy away, didn't change or made the necessary adaptations that had to go along with it in the game plan. But Kotelnicki did not basically fold at any sort of pressure. Kansas was very good at always remaining in the game. Some of his best game designs came when Kansas was at a deficit. Now, we would like to see Penn State not play from behind, but don't rule out Penn State if they happen to trail, especially with the uptick in competition next season. It doesn't seem like he's stubborn. It doesn't seem like he's a stubborn. He's described as open-minded, right? So what's kind of the opposite of stubborn? Open-mindedness, because this offensive system is described as multiple. A concern that was going to be coming in was, well, how does Drew Aller fit into the system? How does Bo Prabula fit into the system? Can it work in the Big Ten? Well, yes, because Kotelnicki is innovative. His offense isn't going to be cookie cutter. It's not going to say, well, because this worked in the Big 12, I know that it's going to work in the Big 10. And that's not going to be the case. This is going to be a challenge. This is going to be a test for the Penn State football players, because I feel like, as complicated, even though it didn't seem like that in the execution, but from an X's and O's standpoint, Mike Yurcich's offense was pretty complex and something that you had to study meticulously. What do we think that Andy Kotelnicki's system is going to be like? The exact same thing, if not a little more complex, because it's going to run so many different variations of offenses. You're going to have RPO. You're going to have pro style. You're going to have spread. He's going to get creative. So one of the biggest things that Kotelnicki brought to Kansas's offense was a 2-quarterback system. I'm not saying that Bo Prabula and Drew Aller are going to split reps 50-50, but they were not afraid to have both Bean and Daniels on the field. Those are the two Kansas quarterbacks on the field at the same time, and it worked. It didn't look clunky. Penn State tried it this year, and it just didn't look natural. But when it was Kotelnicki calling it and executing it, yeah, it worked. Drew Aller will fit because Andy Kotelnicki is going to make Drew Aller fit into this offense. If they have to adjust and Bo Prabula happens to be the quarterback for a number of snaps or games, knock on wood, because I don't want to see anybody get hurt. I want this to be a fair Drew Aller is still the starter because he's earned it, or vice versa, that Bo Prabula somehow it takes over, right? But I feel like there is going to be a reevaluation of the quarterbacks, and why they're going to work is because Kotelnicki is going to make the offense work around them. Okay. He was described as a quarterback whisperer by Kansas fans, Kansas spectators. I mean, he had to coach with 3 different quarterbacks, so this makes a lot of sense. Jalen Daniels was hurt for periods of time, and it's unfortunate. You don't want to see your quarterbacks go down, but then Jason Bean steps up and they don't miss a beat. He was able to succeed with third string walk-on quarterbacks because Jason Bean dealt with injuries, his fair share also in the past the season before, not in 2023 so much. But no matter who his quarterback was, Kansas's offense was still able to motor along. I know what everyone's going to say, and I'll save it for the third segment here that, well, it's the Big 12 defenses. Anybody can. There's Texas is there, right? Oklahoma was a top 15 team this year. Kansas outscored Oklahoma this season and beat them, right? So imagine if Andy Kotelnicki and the Kansas offense are able to work with a third string walk-on quarterback, what Drew Aller is going to be capable of, what Bo Pribula could be capable of in select quarterback packages, right? One statistic that stood out to me from Kansas in this past season is that they were number 2 in explosive pass plays. 20 plus yards is considered an explosive play. They were second in the country. So now kind of factor that in again. The types of players that Kansas had, they good college football Power 5 players, but now you have the resources, the system of Penn State and the talent. Penn State's more talented than Kansas. So Kotelnicki, if he's able to do this at Buffalo, if he's able to do this at Kansas, what's he going to be able to do at Penn State, right? I would also argue that he's a running back whisperer because, yeah, the quarterbacks were able to do well no matter who was the starting QB for Kansas, but the running backs at Buffalo and Kansas, and I'm going to show a little bias here, and this is actually a little fun fact about myself, and some people might remember the name Jarrett Patterson. Jarrett Patterson was the starting running back with the Bulls from 2018 to 2020. People might remember his famous 8-touchdown game. Well, Jarrett Patterson and I went to the same high school, conveniently enough. I was a senior and he was a freshman. I actually got to see him win a couple of high school championship, a private high school, and they won in the private school league. But still, Jarrett Patterson went on to be a pretty good a good Group 5, I should say, a good Group 5 running back. But here are the statistics from someone out of a small high school in Maryland was able to put together at the Division I level. In his first true freshman season, 5.5 yards per carry, 1,000 yards, 1,013 yards rushing, and 14 touchdowns as a freshman, mind you. And then in 2019 as a sophomore, 1,799 yards, 5.8 yards per carry, 19 touchdowns. And then he got involved in the passing game a little more, 209 yards receiving and a receiving touchdown. And then in a shortened schedule in 2020, 6 games, 1,072 yards, 7.6 yards per carry, 19 touchdowns in 6 games. Those were Jarrett Patterson's stats. And funny enough, I will share this. Jarrett Patterson. So when I was a senior, we had the senior freshman youth mentorship set up at our high school, and he was in my small group. I was his youth mentor, if you can believe that. So yes, that's a good. Maybe I hope he backs me up on that. If he ever, hey, was Zach actually your youth mentor in high school? And he'll say, yeah, I remember him. I hope he says that. But I actually know Jarrett Patterson on a personal level. And but that's what Kotelnicki was able to do with Patterson. Patterson set himself up nicely for to get picked up by the Washington Commanders and then signed by the Chargers. Now, Devin Neal at Kansas. Does the system move over? Yes, it does, because here's how it translated. Once again, a freshman running back, 707 yards, 4.5 yards per carry, 8 touchdowns. Then as a sophomore, Devin Neal does it again. Gets even better, 1,090 yards, 6.1 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns. And then this year as a junior, 1,209 yards as we speak, 6.6 yards per carry, 15 rushing touchdowns. I would say that so everybody's going to benefit here. Nicholas, now you go from Jarrett Patterson, Devin Neal to Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. You go from a Jalen Daniels, who unfortunately isn't healthy, and a Jason Bean to Drew Aller and Bo Pribula. The evidence is there in itself that Kansas was pretty upset about this. Somewhat angry, right? You don't want to see, but Kansas really wanted to protect what they had in Kotelnicki as the offensive coordinator. And that should be pretty telling. When a fan base, when the people scouting and watching and covering Kansas say, "Ah, this one's going to sting a little bit, him moving on to Penn State." The proof's right there. That's all you need to know about. Is this a safe hiring? Is this a secure hiring by Penn State? Because it is. I see your comments. We're going to talk to you in just a moment here. But those are my initial thoughts on Andy Kotelnicki as Penn State's next offensive coordinator. If they were going to go outside of Happy Valley, this was the move. I would say Joe Moorhead if you wanted the familiarity, if you wanted to take a different step, if you wanted to go in a different direction, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. Andy Kotelnicki's your guy. And Penn State, I think they aced this hire, and Kansas tried to retain him as best as they could in Penn State, because now you have Pat Kraft in the fold and everybody's aligned, as James Franklin said. That's how this move was able to happen. Probably got a pay raise because he was getting paid 1.1 million. It was reported at Kansas. Penn State probably was able to outbid the Jayhawks here. Bottom line, Penn State gets an offensive mastermind, someone who is creative, someone who is going to build a system that is just going to be a headache for defenses. And if the players adjust well, I'm going to discuss the timing of this hire as well, because that is important. Penn State made that a huge priority going into this one. But the bottom line is Penn State gets a win with this offensive coordinator hire. The offense going into the Big Ten, it's with the talent that he is going to have to work with, is an overall, it's just so much better for Penn State this time around. But now, what is the staff going to look like? What is the offense actually going to look like under Kotelnicki and James Franklin teamed up together? We'll discuss in just a moment here on the show, but let's hear from a sponsor on today's episode, and that is FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel, and right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team simply wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. NFL, college football, basketball, you name it, you can bet on it at FanDuel. We're waiting for that bowl game announcement, because if you want to bet Penn State's next game, you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. And keep playing along with the football season. College football, NFL, FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And the Locked On Podcast Network is proud of this one, launching the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Penn State's offense and staff are going to have a little bit of a different look. I mean, the offense is going to get not necessarily completely made over, but it's going to have so many elements, because what did Kansas run? What did Buffalo run? Well, when you look up what Kansas's offense was, it said multiple systems. So you have a pro-style quarterback. Oh, you're going to have elements of the pro-style offense with Drew Aller. Bo Pribula, something that is very interesting with what Kotelnicki was able to do at Kansas, because he had the quarterbacks to do it. And again, he will have the ability to do that at Penn State. Multiple quarterback systems, where this won't be just a specialty package where it shows up maybe once or twice in the game plan. There will be a concerted effort. This will be a part of the offense. And Penn State has felt like it's always kind of had that luxury over the past 5-7 years, right? Trace McSorley, Tommy Stevens, Sean Clifford, Will Levis, Drew Aller, Bo Pribula, right? Where guys can come in and you're able to not miss a beat, and you can get creative with two quarterbacks on the football field. So that wasn't necessarily the bread and butter of Kansas's offense, but it was a pretty solid staple and something that Kotelnicki incorporated very well into the system. But the elements, it's not going to be, well, Drew Aller's got to adapt to his system. It's going to be Kotelnicki's going to adapt his system to Penn State and the players that he has currently. You are going to see a lot of motion, a lot of resets at the line of scrimmage. Kansas isn't what Kansas did successfully is that they were able to come out in one formation and entirely shift and confuse defenses. That's now going to come to the Big Ten, in this case for Penn State. Kotelnicki would line up the offense in a system where it would look one way and then completely shift around. And Penn State really felt like it didn't do that. They would do the check with me, right? They would check with the sideline and get the second call after reading the defense. Drew Aller would make the adjustments at the line of scrimmage. And then Penn State would almost stay in the identical formation. Maybe a wide receiver shifts around or a running back flips the hip and goes from the right of Drew Aller to the left. Okay. That's not going to be the case. What Kansas would like to do is line up in one formation and then just almost completely and change the entire part of the formation. They would completely change it. They also like to use the outside quite a bit. Jet sweeps were a name of the game for Kansas. They would do things where they get the ball just into space. Okay. That's the simple way to put it. Get the football into space. And when you have speedsters like Nicholas Singleton, who can get to the outside, Dante Cephas is really fast. Could we see Caden Saunders maybe benefit from a playbook like this, where he would have elements? Yes, you're gonna run the ball in between the tackles, but for Kotelnicki, he liked to use the sweeps and get his fastest players to the outside. So imagine Nicholas Singleton lining up to the outside, coming in motion, taking the jet sweep, and continuing to the outside beyond the numbers, because as we saw in the Michigan State game, that's what ultimately worked. The new look offense is going to have a lot of different wrinkles that the Big Ten hasn't really seen. It's refreshing because it felt at times the offense was very bland. And I know that everyone's going to say the Big 12 did not provide that much resistance. But I think the creativity, the innovation is going to move past a lot of that. Let's talk about the coaching staff itself. What will the coaching staff look like for Penn State now? For Kotelnicki, he was the offensive coordinator and the associate head coach at Kansas. He wasn't a position coach. So this is where it gets interesting, because I was under the impression that, okay, J1 Sider is it feels like he's outgrown Penn State to an extent, that he's now had his time as a play caller. He wants to be a play caller, a full offensive coordinator, not just a run game coordinator, not just a game planner. He wants to call plays on Saturdays and who knows, maybe even beyond, right? And you bring somebody outside, you don't hire within, you don't promote J1 Sider. Does Sider just immediately go back to the running back spot? There's a possibility of that. I want to get, there's nothing confirmed. There's only speculation at this point, and where I think the system would best work. Danny O'Brien has been talked about as an up and coming coach, a rock star. James Franklin really believes in him, does not want to let him go. I think that if you can make Kotelnicki the offensive coordinator, and then see what you can do to give position coaches position coaching spots, depending on how this all works out. But because Kotelnicki wasn't coaching the quarterbacks, and I would argue that he might be a good running backs coach. So what about promoting J1 Sider to the quarterback spot? Danny O'Brien maybe stays on as a graduate assistant still, and said, that your time will come, because the coaching staff is going to continually change. I don't fully anticipate that everybody's going to stick around for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And as spots open up, then yeah, it'll make sense. But the coaching staff will have some guys that will probably take over graduate assistant spots. Kotelnicki's going to want to bring in some specific people to be on his staff guys that he's worked with to give promotions, bring them to Penn State as well, get a raise. All right. Penn State's probably going to be able to pay more for those assistants than Kansas. But it'll be interesting because you're not going to promote him. He's not going to be the associate head coach anymore at Penn State. So I'm wondering what position spot he will take unless he's just the offensive coordinator, just the play caller. That might work out in itself, and then you make Danny O'Brien the quarterback's coach. You have Jay Sider still as the running backs coach, Ty Howell as the tight ends guy, Phil Troutwine as the offensive line, Marcus Hagans as wide receiver. The dynamic is going to be interesting, but I'm still under the impression that Jay Sider. How do you feel about that? If you're going from play caller back to, well, we need you to be the running backs coach again. But maybe there's a plan here. Maybe Penn State and James Franklin are able to sell him or Ty Howell on, hey, Andy Kotelnicki is probably going to be here for the next 2, 3, 4 years if everything goes right. And then when that's finished, now that you both have some experience as being actual play callers in the Big Ten, this promotion makes sense. I'm anticipating that we will see probably the status quo here. If Penn State can convince Jay Sider to stay as the running backs coach, Ty Howell as the tight ends coach, and then Danny O'Brien as an assistant on the staff, with the idea that eventually those guys will get promotions or find jobs that are better suited for them in the future, that is what the staff is going to look like. But I am intrigued by it. I'm actually really curious what could happen. Let's take a look at the comments here. Everyone's been patient, and we'll open up the discussion to all of you. Is this a splash or a pass? Skip Stirs says who? Oh, I hope I described very well who Andy Kotelnicki is. I say splash. I do say splash. And the other beat writers are working overtime to sell this guy. I guess I'm working overtime too as a podcast host, right? Another Big 12 guy. Yes, another Big 12 guy, but somebody who has been moving up the ranks progressively and has shown a lot of success everywhere that he's been. Question is, how does this offense change week to week to put the offense in the best position to win big games? Penn State's going to get a very complex offensive system. It's going to be multiple. They're not going to be boxed in, and I think that's going to be different from what we've seen in the Big Ten. The Big Ten, a lot of the Big Ten West schools are very finite. They're married to these systems that are the traditional ground and pound. Think of the Iowas, the Illinois, Wisconsin going through a little bit of a change with Luke Fickell. But Penn State really going off the grain in something that is going to incorporate a lot of different elements that utilize the outside, the interior. It's not going to be smash mouth football. Sometimes it will be when it needs to be, but then there's going to be some trickery involved. Not buying it. Sounds like an inexpensive gadget offensive coordinator. I don't think this move was inexpensive by any means. I think Penn State typically they have paid their coordinators at about the $1 to $1.5 million range, and now the checkbook is going to increase to $2.5, maybe even $3 million. What's the discussion with Manny Diaz? Right? I trust you, Zach. Let's go. This is just part of this is what I'm seeing, what I'm reviewing. It's also what everybody else is seeing too, because you're not going to see that many different things that are being said about Andy Kotelnicki unless it's totally off the beaten path. Okay. Everybody is not necessarily going to have the same opinion, but the numbers are there. Kansas's offense was one of the better ones in the entire country, whether it was explosive plays, whether it was yards per play, all the different sorts of metrics, and they were better than Penn State's. Okay? You are getting an upgrade here. I know the level of defense is different, the Big 12, but you have to think about the likes of Texas. Okay? Kansas State plays good defense. Maybe not necessarily Oklahoma. Traditionally, Mike Gundy runs some good defenses in Oklahoma State. And guess what? Kansas either went outside of Texas. Texas is a college football playoff contender this year. And Kansas only scored 14 points against them. But you outscored Oklahoma. You almost knocked off Kansas State. You almost knocked off Oklahoma State. All this year, Kansas went 8-4 with the talent that they had. They put up 34, and this is a great comment here. I watched the Illinois versus Kansas game, and let me tell you, he did look better than Yurcich. Illinois, one of the staples of their team this year was they were a great run defense, or at least a very respectable one, because they had the law firm, right? One of them is Drazon Newton, is going to be a first-round pick in the upcoming draft. And Penn State really didn't have much of an answer. Eventually, they wore them down and they scored 30 points, but Illinois had no way to stop Kansas. And if you remember that game, if you watched that game, I watched that game live. Kansas was well out in front of Illinois, and the scoreboard's going to say, the box score's going to say 34-23. Zach, what are you talking about? That game was within 2 scores. Illinois could have easily come back. Kansas was up by a boatload, and Illinois was trying to go for 2, was basically going no huddle, 2-minute drill the rest of the way. Kansas had that one from start to finish. And Illinois, you figured, because Kansas was going to did so well against Illinois, that Penn State was going to reap the same benefits, and they did not. I'd like to know what Manny Diaz thinks about this hire. I imagine that he probably thinks it's a really good hire. Penn State's got to sell him on the fact that he will benefit more as the defensive coordinator than going to take a head coaching spot at the potential of Duke, right? That he's in the mix. The reports say that he is in the mix for the Duke spot. And we took those rumors, the speculation, and I saw smoke there with that one. And now it's turning into a little bit of a fire. But they're also interviewing Jim Knowles. Hey, Duke, if you want to go hire Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, by all means, please, I encourage you to do that. I think that would be an absolute home run hire if you pick Jim Knowles over Manny Diaz. Don't get it twisted. Make the right decision and take Ohio State's defensive coordinator away that had a top 5 defense for the Buckeyes this year. If you do that, you're a smart program. You know that. But I appreciate all of your comments. Mike says it'll end up being a good hire if he can milk more talent out of Aller. Yurcich did not bring out the best. No, he didn't. And I think where Mike Yurcich really hurt Drew Aller is confidence. And this is never going to show up on a stat sheet or a box score, but Drew Aller just did not look confident. There wasn't a belief in your 5-star quarterback. When Penn State needed to move the football and had to get drives going in the biggest games of the season, Penn State's passing game was abysmal. But you took the football out of Drew Aller's hands. And Drew Aller, whether people want to agree with me or not, is a 5-star quarterback, is a pocket passer. He's not a dual threat, but somehow Mike Yurcich tried to turn him into one. I think that Kotelnicki, again, won't box Drew Aller in. He'll be able to find a way to utilize his talents and make it work regardless of the system. Because you're going to get multiple systems. You're not going to just get one system that it's going to be a pro style with elements of RPO. No, you're going to get everything. You're going to get spread. You're going to get under center. You're going to get shotgun. You're going to get multiple running backs because you have Singleton and Allen. I was beating this drum the entire season. When are we going to see them both on the field outside of the T formation? Now I truly believe that we will see elements of that offense within Penn State next season. A+ higher, says Robert. I hope so. I really do. I really do hope so. But right now, everything looks good. But what are the concerns? We're also going to get Kansas's expert analysis from Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks coming up momentarily. But I want to address your concerns. I do. The Big 12 defenses, what does that mean for another coach that, oh yeah, he succeeded in the Big 12, but how's he going to do in the Big 10? We'll discuss in just a moment. I want to talk about another sponsor on today's episode, and that is Team Ticker. Everybody watching the live show, I appreciate you tuning in, and I'm going to do a great job of describing it for the audio listeners that listen to this one back. To my left there is the Team Ticker sign. Team Ticker, one-of-a-kind sports sign for you, all you Nittany Lion fans out there. Whether it's football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, soccer, softball, Team Ticker has you covered. Never miss a game as the high-tech retro display provides a countdown to the next big game as well as daily updates on the latest team news, stats, schedules, standings, and so much more. Mobile app connects to your internet so you can get those daily updates, and they're accurate and ready to go all the time. So it's a smart sign essentially, and then easy setup. I had it on the wall up in seconds and ready and running, all set up in a matter of minutes. Each sign is officially licensed, meeting high quality standards, and is assembled by hand in the United States. Team Ticker is the ultimate upgrade to your Nittany Lions sports collection. And once you hang it on the wall, it is going to be the talk of all your fellow Penn State fans. If you're looking for that one eye-catching item for your to showcase your team pride, or a gift for that special Nittany Lions fan, go to teamticker.com and pick up your Team Ticker today. And for this holiday season, Team Ticker wants to help you out with a $50 discount when you use promo code Locked On. So go to teamticker.com, find that Penn State sign, and when you go to checkout, use promo code Locked On for $50 off your Team Ticker purchase. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign for Penn State Nittany Lion fans. And in this final segment, before we welcome on our special guest, Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks, also does Kansas radio as Kansas area radio as well. Are there any concerns here? Because yes, the same song and dance as Mike Yurcich was relatively successful at Oklahoma State. Called plays. Those teams were really good. I got to say that the Big 12, defense 5-6 years ago was not the same as it is now. I think the Big 12 plays a little bit more defense. And why is that? Why is defense in the Big 12 so suspect? For one thing, 7-on-7 is a huge thing in the offseason. You can only play so much tackle football year round. So most programs, developmental programs, especially high school, right? In the SEC, in SEC territory, Big 12 territory, the Southwest, the Southeast. And my point is, in 7-on-7, no defense is played. You can't tackle. You can, if you're good at defense in 7-on-7, you're a special type of football player. But what I'm getting at here is that all those players in the Texas area, Florida, a lot of them are used to they gain that offensive experience. They perfect their offensive skills, and defense is almost all but left behind in 7-on-7 because it makes sense. It's supposed to be an offensive type of game. But 7-on-7, you can do a little bit of 7-on-7 in Pennsylvania in the warmer, but in the warmer climate, in the warmer parts of the country, that is why 7-on-7 flourishes in California, Texas, and Florida. Because, and same thing with baseball, right? I'm not trying to invoke a baseball conversation here, but you can play that sport year round. For 7-on-7, it's kind of the same thing. You can have that element almost year round. And that is why Big 12 defenses, Pac-12 for what it was at one point, and now you see that those players who are really good at 7-on-7 move into these defenses. So that is why the Big 12 doesn't routinely play a lot of defense. But I would say that it's a lot better in years past, and I'm eager to get Derek's perspective on it because he will understand since he's watched a lot of Big 12 football here and a lot of Kansas football as well. So coming over from the Big 12 to the Big 10 is a concern. But I think when you show that you win championships at Wisconsin Whitewater at Division II, you go from a 2-10 Buffalo team to a team that is contending for MAC titles year in and year out. And also getting the most out of your players too. 8 touchdown games out of Jarrett Patterson, for crying out loud. And then going to Kansas and taking a team that was, nobody wanted to coach that team. Les Miles didn't even work out. And look what he did at the likes of LSU, right? And he goes in there and he's able to put together good, great offensive systems that are able to outscore the likes of Oklahoma, a ranked Oklahoma team that beat and knocked off a Texas team. And Kansas was able to win that game. So that's the first one. The second one is, well, James Franklin has said that he values head coaching experience in his coordinators, right? James Franklin, that's why I fully anticipated that Joe Moorhead is probably the logical candidate here. Why even entertain Andy Kotelnicki? Because he's just an offensive coordinator. He's not even a position coach. but he was the associate head coach at Kansas. He was the associate head coach at a Power 5 football program. On top of that, the system that Lance Leipold likes to run may not be exactly similar to the way James Franklin does things, but it's identical. Lance Leipold is very hands-off, and I think Derek from Locked On Jayhawks will be able to confirm or deny this, but the way that I've seen it is that James Franklin and Lance Leipold allow their coordinators, allow their coaches to do their job, to be the leader of their respective unit. So Andy Kotelnicki doesn't need to be coddled here, right? A little bit of a play on words, but he doesn't need to be coddled, and James Franklin doesn't have to babysit him all the time and make sure, hey, is the offensive system good here? What works, what doesn't? James Franklin is going to be able to have his influence wherever he needs to be. The wide receivers, the offense, the defense, recruiting, dinners, alumni, right? Everything, because that's what it takes to be a good college football program leader. So Kotelnicki isn't going to be a liability in this case. He'll be able to be independent and on his own. And all those guys will collaborate again. Kotelnicki, Sider, Hal, James Franklin will get together. It's not just going to be one by himself. All of those guys collaborated throughout the season. And now you're getting someone that is open-minded. Mike Yurcich said that one of the things that he was learning to do going into the season, this was in interviews leading up to the season, that he felt like he needed to listen a little more. And I feel like Kotelnicki is someone that is going to be able to listen, to adapt his game plan, to base it around the needs of what is going on with Drew Aller in the Big Ten. It's not going to be cookie cutter. It's not going to be, he's adjusted his system, whether it was at Division II, whether it was at Buffalo, Kansas, and he's going to make it work for the Big Ten. So those were, I think, the two biggest concerns: the skill level of the Big 12, the defense, lack of defense, no defense at all. And then what about the head coaching experience? Well, he has that even without the head coaching title, and something that Mike Yurcich kind of lacked in this case. Mike Yurcich was an associate head coach. He called plays. He was an offensive coordinator. He was the passing game coordinator at Ohio State, but there still was that element of there needed to be a little more, too much collaboration almost, it felt like at times. Everyone's been patient. We have Derek Johnson waiting in the wings from a Locked On Jayhawks. I am excited to speak with him, and you should be excited for that conversation because we are going to get the true perspective of what Andy Kotelnicki is bringing to Happy Valley and the Penn State Nittany Lions.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And let's welcome him in, Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks. Derek, I appreciate the time doing this on the fly, as I know that Kansas has to adapt and find its next offensive coordinator, but I see some moves have already been made here. Derek, thanks so much for the time. Thanks for being able to come on the show here and discuss what this means for Penn State and what you were able to see at Kansas. Before we move further, Derek, what can you give the listeners, the viewers, a background of what you do with Locked On Jayhawks and everything else you do in radio in your local area?
Yeah, I work with Locked On Jayhawks, obviously covering the team every day, and I do stuff with Rock Chalk Sports Talk. It's our local, we're the flagship station in Lawrence, Kansas, 3 to 6 Monday through Friday on the radio in town. So plenty plugged in with everything going on here with KU.
Perfect. So you are the expert to discuss exactly this. And I think, and we have the live chat going. So if you have any questions for Derek specifically of what he's seeing out of Kansas's offense and what this moves mean and how it can adapt to the Big Ten, but I'll get it started off. What is Kansas losing in Andy Kotelnicki going to Penn State? What was he able to do that worked so well at Kansas? What is he leaving behind?
So Kotelnicki is the ultimate, I guess, chess kind of guy. Like he is very multiple in his offense. Everything he talks about is that he wants to be the hardest offense to prepare for week in and week out. They're very process oriented is Kansas overall as a program, including himself. And he is someone who that is his goal. His goal isn't put up X amount of points or do this or that. Now they're a lower tempo team. You look at some of the point per game numbers and, Kansas still ranked well in the Big 12, but you look at the yards per play. If you look at more of the efficiency stuff, they're one of the best offenses in the league. So, like for instance, they're top 3 in yards per pass. They're one of the best yards per run team. Last year, that was the case too. They were one of the ones up there with TCU, and in some cases were better than TCU in like yards per play and rushing yards per play. So not a super high tempo, very balanced. They run and pass kind of equal amounts. And it's not one of those guys who he's like, oh, we have to run and pass equal amounts just because. He will do in certain games. They will run it more. They ran for almost 400 yards against UCF. In certain games, they will throw it all over the field. They threw for like 400 yards against Oklahoma State. It just kind of depends what you're trying to take away, and they will do other things. Lot of weird formations, a lot of weird shifts, a lot of weird motions, a lot of different personnel packages where they have specific players utilized in specific personnel packages. He is an excellent offensive coordinator, and I think Penn State's getting a really good one.
Is he, now you mentioned balance and the creativity. If you had to go one way or another, is he someone that is going to really, are the running backs going to benefit more, or does Drew Aller and Bo Pribula, because we saw that he wasn't afraid to use 2 quarterback systems when both of those guys were available, Daniels and Bean, and it worked very well. It wasn't just a one-off play where the 2 quarterbacks would come in. It was integrated into the game plan and something defenses really had to plan for. But one side or the other, is he more of a running backs guy or is he more of a quarterbacks guy?
Here is really just balanced. I mean, it's going to hurt a little bit of the top running, like Devin Neal, for instance, who's the Jayhawks stud running back right now. He has over 1,200 yards. He only has like 183 carries. So if you look at, there are 11 Power 5 running backs right now that have 1,100 or more rushing yards. Devin Neal is first among all of those 11 in yards per carry, but he wasn't on any of the Doak Walker semifinalist list or anything because they're splitting carries with that other guy. His saying he's had in the past was a pair and a spare. They like to have 2 running backs. They rotate in. Both are going to get similar to equal carries. And then the other guy is kind of just the late in game or if there's an injury. With the quarterback, it's a quarterback-friendly system because of a lot of the motions are going to help you figure out the defense, make the reads for everything. And because you run the ball well, I mean, it's just, the one thing that'll be interesting is they ran a lot of QB runs here at Kansas. Obviously, that doesn't seem to be as much of the skill set of Drew Aller. He has been someone, though, whether he's been at Buffalo or Kansas, they adjust to the personnel. So as much as I look at what he's done here at Kansas, I don't know how applicable it will and won't be to Penn State. Some of the stuff will, some of it won't. They had QB injuries. They never really were rotating quarterbacks at Kansas. Like that was something that goes back to Lance Leipold. They don't like to rotate quarterbacks. They like to stick with a guy. The only reason it's been multiple quarterbacks here is just because of injuries. But you go back to his days at Buffalo before Kansas. He had one year where they led the MAC in passing yards, and that was when Tyree Jackson, who ended up going off to the NFL after, was their quarterback. The very next year when he went off to the NFL, they became the number 1 team in the MAC in rushing yards because they adjusted to their personnel. So he really is, whatever you have, he is going to emphasize that. He is not really, I have to do this or I have to do that. But certainly it is a balanced offense, one where, like KU has some really good receivers. You look at Pro Football Focus, they're top 10 in the country in receiving grade, but they don't really have anybody who's above, 700, 800 receiving yards because it's a bunch of receivers. It's a bunch of tight ends. It's a bunch of running backs. It's balanced between running and throwing the football. So a really good offensive coordinator, tough to prepare for. And he just kind of helps everyone because he makes everybody's job a little bit easier.
Derek, how would you say the Big 12, the caliber of defense in the Big 12 was this season and the past 2 years?
I think it's definitely one of those things where it's underrated. Obviously, you get the idea of the Big 12 from when like I was growing up and it was everybody was running air raid or spread. And you think of the year with 08 with like Sam Bradford and Colt McCoy and all these guys. It is kind of transitioned. I think one of the big teams to do that, Iowa State, like they've had a top 20 defense in some years, like top 10, top 5 defense. over the past couple of years. And a lot of teams have started running what they do, which is this kind of like 3-3-5 stack. You see other teams run variations of it, like a 3-2-6, and it's helped slow down some of the passing games. So you've had like good defenses in the Big 12 here lately. Like Oklahoma's a top 35 defense. Texas has a top 15 or top 10 defense. Iowa State's got a top 20 defense in the country right now. Kansas State typically pretty good on the defensive side of the ball. If you look at Bill Connolly's ESPN SP Plus, the Big 12 is basically in line with the ACC and the Pac-12 in terms of defensive rating right now, overall as a conference. So it's no longer like there was a couple years ago, the Oklahoma State team that lost to Baylor in the Big 12 title game. That team was having statistically, by some measurements, the best defensive Big 12 season like ever. So it actually has started to shift a little bit. It's still not a fully defensive conference or anything like that, but there are a lot more better defenses. And like I said, kind of in line with what the Pac-12 and the ACC are at right now.
We'll get to the comments in just a moment. I see some good questions here. Another one I wanted to ask Derek was what his overall responsibilities at Kansas, because he was the offense. He wasn't a position coach. He was the offensive coordinator and the associate head coach. James Franklin says he values head coaching experience above all else, especially for his coordinator spots. Joe Moorhead was the Fordham head coach when he took over. And then, I know some changes were made and they didn't necessarily get that head coaching experience that they wanted at the OC spot over the past few years. But then Manny Diaz comes in and he's a former head coach, and James Franklin reiterated again, I want head coaching experience as best as I can. Well, Kotelnicki has not been a head coach anywhere along the way, but he has had the associate title at Kansas. What were his responsibilities? How did Lance Leipold allow him to run his system independently?
Yeah, Leipold very much is kind of more of your CEO style of head coach, and he kind of sits back and lets guys run things. Like, he doesn't interfere. He's in on everything, and they all are very kind of meshed together and understand the same message and same type of thing they're doing. So they're all on the same page, and once they're all on the same page, it is very much, I kind of let you do what you want to do and let you be loose in certain ways. So yeah, from that standpoint, he doesn't have the head coaching experience, but he has been basically given that, you are the head coach of the offense, so to speak.
Let's go to the comments here. And I like this one from Steven. How are his in-game adjustments, and does he do it fast? I imagine that not necessarily tempo, but how quick is he to say, all right, this isn't working, let's scrap it. I've also seen Kansas fans say that Kotelnicki, some of his best coaching comes from when Kansas was at a deficit. What would you say to all of that, Derek?
Well, so this year, Andy Kotelnicki had to be into a position where they got to their third string quarterback. So Jalen Daniels comes in as the preseason Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. Right. He injures his back. Then Jason Bean comes in. He's playing really well. And then against Texas Tech, Jason Bean gets injured. Their third string quarterback was a former true freshman walk-on quarterback. They gave him a scholarship about a month ago. He has to come into the Texas Tech and Kansas State games. And in both of those games, you end up, they're shut out at halftime. They adjusted well at half. They put up 13 in the second half, struggled a bit in the red zone in that game, but you saw it get better. Kansas State game, they come right out of the locker room and score a touchdown. The TCU game last year, which was the game that they ended up losing 38-31, Kansas was shut down at halftime of that game, and Jalen Daniels gets hurt at the end of the half. They have just 3 points at halftime against TCU. They put up 28 in the second half against TCU. So he's adjusted well at halftime. He's been able to do more with less. Yeah, whether they've gotten to the backup quarterback or the third string quarterback, he'll adjust to what you kind of need to have happen in both of those areas. I think really the only, knock at times is sometimes it gets too cute. There are a lot of trick plays, a lot of fun formations. Sometimes you'll get the comments about, oh, you went too far there, or just, be normal on this possession or be normal on that play, or do something like, for instance, KU was down 13-10 to Texas Tech. And there was certainly some, outcry about this call. They ran a wildcat with the running back and let him throw the ball on 3rd and goal from the 4 against Tech when they were down 3, and then ended up not getting it. It was his first throw of the year and everything like that. So sometimes that can be the one knock. But as far as adjustments, he tends to adjust. And maybe it'll, if they come in with a game plan of we're going to run it down their throat, maybe they'll try it for a couple series, but if it starts to open up, like for instance, this past week against Cincinnati, Cincinnati was throwing a bunch of numbers to stop the run, and they were stopping. I mean, Kansas had 2 drives without points to open the game. And then all of a sudden, Kansas started opening it up, and Jason Bean was 10 for 10 at halftime passing the ball. So he will adjust as the game goes on. He makes pretty quick adjustments as the game goes.
We'll take one final question from the comment section. How does he call a game for a pocket passer versus a mobile quarterback?
Obviously, with Kansas, he's had the mobile quarterback, Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean. Now, Cole Ballard is more of, I wouldn't consider him a mobile quarterback. He's more of like a moxie type of runner where he can run, but it's more of just like, he's not out speeding or anyone. When they do have the fast quarterback, you'll see them run a bit of triple option, read option. You'll see him run speed option to the outside. When you have the more, a pocket passer type, you won't see him call that stuff as much, but he's still going to call some of the speed option stuff, because that can just involve reading the defense and knowing when to pitch it more than anything. At Buffalo, that would probably be better for that, because at Kansas, he's had it the entire time. At Buffalo, he did have at times, like I think Kyle Van Treese, he wasn't like a super mobile quarterback, and they were able to call an efficient offense. That became more of a running offense and a play action offense. So, with more of a pocket passer, maybe more under center, more play action game, whereas versus with the more mobile guy, maybe you are going to see more of an option type of game. But like I said, he tends to adjust, and he's a really good offensive coordinator at picking and choosing stuff from around the country, from the NFL, that he'll make work whatever personnel they have. So I don't know how athletic Drew Aller is, but I wouldn't really be worried about it, because he has been able to adjust over the course of his time as the offensive coordinator, wherever it's been, at Buffalo or Kansas.
Drew isn't exactly a statue, but he's not your straight line track star speedster. He actually, Mike Yurcich utilized him more so than we thought he should have been as a dual threat quarterback. Drew Allers, he can get you 5 to 7 yards on third down when you don't spy the quarterback, and he's actually really good within the pocket. He has good tight area speed and I would say quickness. But if you're talking about a 40-yard dash, Derek, it's no contest. That other guy's probably going to win. But Drew Aller by no means is a statue. Derek, I won't take up too much of your time. I got 2 more questions that I think are pertinent here. And it's, how is Kotelnicki as a recruiter? Because Penn State doesn't make this move if there isn't some influence on recruiting.
Well, that's what's kind of interesting here, is that when you look at KU's recruiting class, if you compare KU's to Penn State's, it's not going to be, it's for Penn State to be a bad recruiting class. But for KU, it's one of their best recruiting classes that they've had in quite some time. But a majority of the guys, Kotelnicki was not the main recruiter, and on a majority, he wasn't even the secondary recruiter. He more so was just kind of a guy over that, all the coaches, they meet with all the coaches, and you get your conversations, and everybody kind of has the same message for KU. And so from that standpoint, he was. But from the KU perspective, he wasn't one of their big time recruiters. Like, they have a 4-star quarterback from Detroit, Isaiah Marshall, who just won the state title for them. He was recruited by the quarterback's coach, who now has been promoted to co-offensive coordinator since the news of Kotelnicki. And then they have a bunch of these big recruits from Arizona. One of them has offers lately from Michigan and stuff as a defensive end, but that was their defensive backs coach. So he hasn't really been known for being a recruiter. He is a super gregarious, funny guy. Like in the press conferences every week, he brings people candy. He brings up, thought teasers to open things up. He's a funny guy. He has a good personality, more than just football. He's a really good dude. But I haven't seen a huge impact on the recruiting trail. So I don't know. That kind of remains to be seen for me.
Okay. That's interesting, because if James Franklin feels confident in what he has as a recruiting base, the network that he's built, the coaching staff devoted to that, maybe Kotelnicki is brought in to simply just coach and game plan and call the right plays. But that would make sense. And then he just focuses on what he needs to focus on instead of being spread too thin. Derek, final question I have is, Kansas seems like they, Lance Leipold, the players are committed to him. And with what Penn State has at quarterback, running back, wide receiver is obviously a huge question mark here. What I'm getting at is, do you think that Kotelnicki will bring any Kansas players with him in the transfer portal?
It's definitely possible. Jim Zabrowski, who they again promoted from QB coach, he has a good relationship with a lot of the players. And if they retain the rest of the staff, I don't totally know. Now, I don't really expect. I mean, Jason Bean's graduating. Jalen Daniels already announced he's coming back to KU for next year, so
Okay.
I think he'll be back. When you look at the running back position, like Devin Neal, who's their stud running back, he might just go pro anyway, and he's a Lawrence kid, so I don't think that would be in the cards. When you look at the receivers, there has been a little bit of murmurs that maybe there could be some movement with some players leaving. So that would be the one that I'm kind of looking at. Now, he is the tight ends coach at Kansas. So maybe you would look at, some of the tight ends, maybe some of those guys would bring along. But like Jared Casey's a local Kansas kid. And he is somebody who, I don't know, like I don't expect him to go there. And I think I saw a comment earlier, Penn State's had tight ends as a strength. So maybe it doesn't make sense. Plus KU's all Big 12 tight end is graduating at the end of the year anyway. So I don't know. I guess it wouldn't shock me. But at the end of the day, as long as KU retains their staff, I don't know how much is going to interest Penn State. So it wouldn't shock me if maybe a receiver or something like that does end up going over. But I could more so see if KU loses a couple players because of this move, maybe it's just out in the open anywhere else in the transfer portal.
So Kotelnicki did have influence on the tight ends, you're saying?
Yeah, he was the tight ends coach in addition to being the offensive coordinator.
Okay.
Used him in a ton of ways. They had a bunch of packages where they had 2 tight ends on the field, 3 tight ends on the field. They threw to him a good amount. They were key in the blocking game. And I think Mason Fairchild, who was, didn't really have a ton of production his first 3 years at Kansas. He's now turned into, he was second team all Big 12 last year. He was honorable mention Big 12 this year. He might have a chance at an NFL shot, maybe as a late draft pick or as an undrafted guy. Jared Casey, he's turned into a really valuable player as a former walk-on. So he does a lot of work on the offensive line and tight end game. He's a former offensive lineman himself from back in the day. He ran a triple option offense when he was playing back in the day. So yeah, he worked most closely with the tight ends. I don't know what he'll be doing at Penn State.
Okay. Well, that makes sense because I did say, because I want to correct myself then, because I said he didn't really work with the positions as closely or didn't have a position title. And that's from the Kansas website. It said that he was the offensive coordinator and the associate head coach. So I wonder if maybe Ty Howell switches to quarterbacks or something like that. And I know Ty Howell's the tight ends coach currently at Penn State. And then Kotelnicki takes over tight ends and is the offensive coordinator as well. But he's probably going to be dropping that associate head coach title.
Yeah, it could. And also it could work with the offensive line because his experience there and tight end in a way is an extension of that. So it wouldn't shock me one way or another what he's working with. But I think overall, I would be very excited. If I were a Penn State fan, this guy gets a lot with less. This guy gets a lot of matchups for his players. He runs a pro style offense in some ways in that they're going to use personnel in a pro style, but he's going to be creative with it. The amount of motions and formations and creativity that he uses is subpar. And I know certainly people are missing in him and already, some of the message boards here are freaking out about losing him. So, which is, I think, a good sign for another school picking him up.
Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks joining the show. Derek, I appreciate the time. Before I let you go, just what's next for you? Coverage of the team, basketball, whether it's for your podcast or the radio station.
Yeah, we're just waiting to see what bowl game Kansas is going to be in. And obviously we're covering this with a different side of things. For ours, it's how are they going to fill in? How are they going to overcome this loss? Obviously, KU basketball has got a big game this week against Connecticut. Top 5 showdown between the last 2 national champs. So plenty of basketball coming at you too. And you can find all that stuff on Locked On Jayhawks.
All right, perfect. Derek, thank you so much for the time. I wish you well. And I know this might be a one-time thing here, but who knows? Maybe at some point Kansas can match up with Penn State in a basketball game or a bowl game in the future if Lance Leipold is able to stick around as well.
Yep, there we go. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Zach.
All right, thank you. And that is Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks. I appreciate everyone checking out today's show, being part of the conversation as Andy Kotelnicki joins Penn State, is set to be hired as Penn State's next offensive coordinator. News broke by Bruce Feldman, but I will give a shout out to Blue White Illustrated, who covers a lot of Penn State athletics as well. They were one of the first ones to even link Kotelnicki to Penn State and bringing those reports to you. And now we're just talking about it as everything is set here. An agreement was made today on Thursday, November 30th, and we'll continue to bring on the experts, people who are covering Penn State closely to discuss this move, how it's going to affect Drew Aller, Penn State's offense. But this is a move that everyone should be very excited about. If you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. And for more Penn State football coverage, analysis, keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.